Hi there, this is Solitary from Solitary Films, and welcome to another director battle. Today it's the turn of two movie brats, so it's Martin Scorsese against Brian DePALMA. I'll give a little history lesson on my own personal journey with these two filmmakers. Again, please leave your comments below who you vote for. Again, it's just a bit of fun. It is a battle, it's not a competition. But it is interesting watching these videos and seeing your wonderful reactions to it. And I know SGS Arts is doing some response videos to them, which you should go and check out, because he talks about the filmmakers a lot more eloquently than I do. But for me, we'll start with Scorsese. And for me, he was, at one point in my life, my second favourite film director. I think in every young man's life of a certain age, Scorsese is quite high up in your favourite directors lists. Because his films do kind of appeal to young men, probably the same young men who of a certain age would be Tarantino fans. But over the last 25 years, really since Casino, I've kind of lost touch with Scorsese a bit after his collaborations with DiCaprio, which seem to be every single film almost. I'm not a Leonardo DiCaprio fan particularly, and I do think, even though I haven't seen them all, I haven't seen Wolf of Wall Street, I haven't seen The Aviator, I haven't seen The Irishman. Well, to be fair, I've seen the first 20 minutes of The Irishman, and I never really went back to it. But again, Scorsese for me, at one point in my life, was really important, whereas now he's probably outside the top 20, he might even be outside the top 30. I've said in other places on YouTube that I do think Scorsese's value in the last 25 years to cinema is actually more in his restoration work, or help with restoration of old films, of lost films. Scorsese is one of those guys that you could listen to talk about films for hours on end. I do like the guy personally, but I do think Nazarene Prod has made good points before in the past. Every now and again he does, about how Scorsese really needs a good writer, because he is one of those directors that's more a director and who just needs a good writer. In the last 25 years he hasn't really had that. He really needs a good writer to give him a spine for his visual storytelling. And I do think his older films that I used to love as a youth, on reassessment, things like Raging Bull and Goodfellas, I do think Taxi Driver still stands up. Again, that was written by Schrader. I do think Last Temptation of Christ stands up. Again, that was written by Schrader, I believe. But those kind of classic Scorsese films like Mean Streets, I don't think stands up as well. And for me, it's these smaller films that interest me more now. So After Hours, which is one of those films that desperately needs a Blu-ray, is a lovely little film. Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Obviously my favourite, because I'm weird, my favourite Scorsese film is Age of Innocence. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. Kundun is a beautiful film, again heavily inspired by Michael Powell. Obviously, The Age of Innocence has some Michael Powell kind of flourishes with the screen going pure yellow or pure red, which is a throwback to Black Narcissus, amongst other things. I would say the only decent film he's made in the last 25 years, at least for me, probably is Hugo. And again, that's about cinema itself, George Méliès. So when Scorsese talks about cinema, I think he's more interesting than his other kind of films. But again, I can't underestimate what Scorsese did mean to me when I was younger. Like I said, he was at one point number 2 in my favourite directors list. But I do also think that he has become such an establishment figure that even critics don't really do their job and criticise him. He does seem to get away with a lot of things that other directors don't really get away with, because he's almost an institution at this point, which again is understandable, because again he has meant a lot to American cinema, and certainly if mainstream cinema fans were voting for the greatest directors of all time, I'm sure Scorsese would be up there with Spielberg and probably Clint Eastwood, who, strangely enough, Clint Eastwood will not be appearing on a director battle. So Scorsese's a difficult one for me, because yes, I have been harsh on him in the past, but I think it is just because you kind of held him to a higher standard back in the day, and he did have a certain benchmark where all his films would generally land at or above that benchmark, and certainly the ones in his last 25 years just haven't, the ones I've seen, just haven't come up to that. Again, I'm not going to go on a Departed rant. I know some people like The Departed, but to me it's a truly awful film, and it's one of the worst films I've ever seen by a director that's supposed to know what he's doing. How he would let Jack Nicholson give a performance like that. The one seminal, or one of the really great moments in Infernal Affairs involving gravity, Scorsese manages to completely butcher that. The rat running along the window ledge at the end of the film, I mean, it's something Brett Ratner would do. But I'm not going to go on a rant about The Departed. That's water under the bridge. The Boston accents are awful, even by Martin Sheen, who's from Boston. Mark Wahlberg's character, there's nobody in reality who is like that. His job just seems to be hurl verbal abuse at his colleagues. I mean, but I'm not going to go on a rant about The Departed. So again, in summation, you do feel Scorsese has let us down somehow in the last 25 years, but again, just like great bands don't tend to make their best music 40 years into a career, so you can't really expect film directors to do that. There's only rare ones that do, and they are cream of the crop. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. You can name a few yourself. So that's Scorsese. He used to be very high in my list. He's not so high anymore. Again, I haven't seen all of his films in the last 25 years. To be honest, I don't really have that much of an urge to. And then we get to Brian De Palma. Now again, if we'd had this director battle 25 years ago, Scorsese would win, and not necessarily in a rout, but he would win comfortably. Whereas now, let's talk about De Palma. I think De Palma is underrated. I'm not going to let De Palma off scot-free. I think the last 20 years, I don't think De Palma's made anything special either. Again, I haven't seen his last 4 films, to be honest. I'll probably see them at some point. I'm more inclined to watch De Palma's last 4 since Femme Fatale in 2002 than Scorsese's later ones. But certainly if you are an Arrow collector, then obviously Arrow has Phantom of the Paradise, which in the last couple of years has replaced Rocky Horror Picture Show as my favourite musical of all time. It's an absolute masterpiece. And Arrow also have Carrie. They also have Sisters. Obviously Criterion has Sisters as well. They have Raising Cain. They have Obsession. They have Fury. They have Dress to Kill, as does Criterion. They have the early De Niro De Palma set. And of course they have Blowout, which is another masterpiece. I prefer Blowout to Blow Up, and again this is coming out in UK Criterion quite soon. So if you're an Arrow collector and you're a De Palma fan, then there's lots of fun to be had. De Palma always kind of got the short stick by people claiming he was a Hitchcock rip-off and not really giving him much credit for being such a wonderful visual storyteller. He's every bit the visual storyteller that Scorsese is, and perhaps even more so. De Palma continues, well, with what I've seen of his films up to 2002, continues to do interesting things with the camera. You know, you could say, well, De Palma's not about any big themes and big issues, but there's more going on underneath the surface of his film. Sometimes, again, he is kind of unfairly treated as, oh, he's just a surface director and there's not that much going on underneath. But there's more than you would think. Obviously, if you've seen my Hitchcock versus Clouseau battle, it's no surprise that I would actually rate De Palma higher than Hitchcock. Obviously that might be blasphemy, but again, this is just opinion, and again, my opinion is not fact. And obviously he had a huge hit with Scarface and the polished Hollywood blockbuster The Untouchables, which is almost like a greatest hits with De Niro and Sean Connery and Costner and Armani suits and Morricone soundtrack. But again, I think De Palma films, which again, when I was younger, 25 years ago, I might have thought, yeah, they are surface and they can't hold a candle to Scorsese because Scorsese's talking about big things. But now, as I get older, and re-watching De Palma again, you really appreciate how well crafted his films are, and how precise they are. He's another guy that you could listen to for hours talking about his process. There's some really good interviews on YouTube with some directors interviewing De Palma. So this, to me, is an interesting battle. The younger me would take Scorsese all day long, but the older me, who has been through the last 25 years of Scorsese, again, haven't seen all the films, and you know, the last 20 years of De Palma almost, and I haven't seen his last 4 films. But I would actually take De Palma, which might be shocking, but as great as Age of Innocence is and King of Comedy, and I think Taxi Driver, like I said, still stands up. I think some of these other classic Scorsese films don't really stand up as well as they used to, or as well as the younger me loved them. So for me, the result of this battle is De Palma. But again, that's just my opinion. My opinion is not fact. But please let me know what you think, because this series has been really fun for me, reading all your comments that are far more intelligent than mine. And it is interesting how much of a factor your history with the director is, because objectively some of my favourites I can easily see, you know, if I rewatch Everything by Everybody, those favourites might actually change. And if I do another director top 40 hopefully next year, the order might be somewhat different, which again, if you told me 20 years ago, that would just be ridiculous. So thanks very much for watching, and again, like I said, please comment below who your favourite is, and once we get through this marathon, I'll hopefully give the results. I don't know whether there'll be a round 2. Obviously there's a commenter who would quite like a round 2, but we'll see what happens. But thanks very much for watching. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying it's just a bit of fun.